Right, we are going to look at the two sections that make up the theory part of our paper, which is question number 1 and question number 2 first. With the rural urban settlements, is the first question, and economic geography of South Africa is the second option. Right, so like as usual, the structure of our final paper, it's 60 marks per each section for the two theory questions. Then we have geographical skills and map work, which constitutes 30 marks to make a total of 150. Right, let's start with our first question on rural and urban settlements, which is question number 1. With question number 1.1, refer to the sketch below on the pattern and shape of rural settlements. Write only the letter next to the question numbers 1.11 to 1.17. Right, so if we try to analyze this illustration here before we attempt the question, we can try to figure out the sense of the settlement being illustrated on this particular illustration here. Right, you can see we have our scale here, which is 1:15,000, which is a relatively large scale map extract. And if you check your key indications here, we have cultivated land, which is represented by those lines, and we have trees, which are also indicated by that symbol that you can see there, and we have the farmsteads, which are indicated by those squares, and lastly the road network is being indicated by that line. Right, so if we check our settlements here, if we try to analyze the first settlement that we are seeing, which is settlement C here, I think you can see where settlement C is. Right, if you can check there, try to analyze settlement C in terms of its shape, you can see that the farmsteads are located in some linear form along the river. So this basically, when you're talking of the shape of a settlement, we can figure out that this is a linear settlement. And also, if we try to check on this part here, analyzing it using the concept of settlement shape, you can see that this is basically a T-junction shape for settlement F. Also, there is this junction which is forming here. There's this route and this route which is connecting here to form a T-junction settlement. And also, if we check on this part here, you see that there is a farmstead which is in the midst of a big cultivated landscape, or in a big farmstead. So basically, that is how we can try to interpret that illustration before we attempt the questions. But however, let's proceed to check the questions that we have. And also, maybe before we look at the questions, I need to make a distinction between the two aspects of settlement. We have what we call the shape of a settlement and the pattern of a settlement. Those two, usually you tend to find that learners tend to confuse them. Right, whenever we're talking of settlement shape, right, that is where we have the different shapes that are formed by the different setting of housing units in a settlement. For example, you can talk of a circular shape, then you can talk of maybe a semicircular, then you can talk of a linear, where the housing units are in line, maybe along a transport route or along a river or along a mountain range. Then you can also talk of other settlement shapes, like talked of the circular, the semicircular, the linear. You can also talk of the T-junction settlement, and you can also talk of other settlement shapes like the stellar. When we're talking of a stellar here, this word is derived from the star, where we have maybe some intersections of modes of transport, of transport routes, and then we have settlements developing and radiating along such routes. That gives us a stellar shape. So basically, those are the shapes that we talk about. But when we are talking of settlement pattern, now we are talking of something different here. Under settlement patterns, we need to be clear. Whenever you get a question which asks about the settlement pattern, remember we have two patterns of settlement. It's either the settlement is a dispersed, this is a pattern, or the settlement is nucleated. Right. When we talk of a dispersed settlement, we are saying the housing units are further apart from each other. Like one is there, you find the next maybe after a kilometer, you find another one there, maybe after a kilometer and a half, you find another one there. It means these ones are in a dispersed pattern. Then what we call a nucleated or a clustered, it's one and the same thing, nucleated and clustered settlement. Right, we are looking at a settlement whereby the units of housing are just as close to each other. That is an example of a cluster. The housing units are just as close to each other as is possible. Right, so that's the difference between the settlement patterns and the settlement shapes. You should be able to distinguish between those two. Whenever you're talking of a shape of a settlement, we are referring to those different shapes. And when you're talking of a pattern of a settlement, it's either a settlement comes in the form of a dispersed, or it comes in the form of a cluster or a nucleated settlement. Right, then that was just for the sake of clarification of maybe some aspects that tend to confuse or that are usually misinterpreted by learners in the examinations. Right, let's go to our questions and try to figure out the correct responses to the given questions, given that we have tried to analyze the illustration and tried to bring out sense from whatever is illustrated on the infographic that we are going to use in answering this particular question. Right, we move to question number 1.11. The settlement pattern at A is, we are looking at pattern at A. You see where A is here, you need to be very articulate. You see A is here. To this side here, you see there are these rows of trees, and A is just indicated here. And if you try to check relating settlement A to F, you can see that A is on its own, while F is on its own to the extreme southwest. And also if you check B here, B is also independent on its own to the extreme south. So these three settlements are independent of each other. So we are worried about A only as a settlement. What kind of pattern is that one? Definitely the correct response for that one, given the explanation that we have had on settlement pattern, you can see that there is only that settlement on its own, very far away from other settlements. So it means that settlement is in the form of a dispersed pattern. It's some form of an isolated settlement on its own. It's on its own there and is dispersed very far away from the other settlements to the south and to the extreme southwestern direction. Right, that is the response for the first question. We'll move on to number 112. The settlement pattern at B. Now we are analyzing B here. You see the difference between A and B. A is on its own, it's far away from other settlements, and the farmstead is just on its own. Here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 farmsteads which are almost in the same periphery. They are almost within the same geographical space. So if we are to relate to the type of settlement again in terms of pattern, that is the clear opposite of what is happening at A here. What is happening at A is a true opposite of what is happening at settlement B. So if we are to analyze that one, we will tend to come out with the correct response as a clustered or a nucleated settlement. For that matter, it's clustered or it's nucleated. Right, we'll move on to number 1.13. Right, 1.13 it says settlement A or B is likely to generate more profit. If you are comparing these two, where are we likely to have more profits being generated? Right, we are trying to analyze the location of these settlements in terms of their pattern and try to relate to the activities that take place there. If you check, this is a rural settlement, and you know rural settlements, they are predominantly unifunctional. They offer one main service, which is primary services. They offer primary activities. right? So which means for this instance here, our core activity that happens in this settlement is farming. So we want to try to relate farming to the nature of these two types of settlements, which is A and B. If you are to look at A is on its own, it's an independent settlement which is far away from other settlements, and which will also imply that all the land surrounding here is made to the best use by this particular farmer who is situated at A, which will enable them to have more land to do more productivity along, and as they use the land surrounding their area of residence. And also, if we check, there is this thing here which we can see here, which is indicated here. This is a windmill which is indicated here. So this windmill is also a suggestion that there might be very serious commercial production taking place on this particular piece of land. Remember, the windmill is used, the wind pump is actually used to extract our groundwater, and in this instance we want to relate it to farming activities, which will also imply that there is reliable water supply for this particular farmer on this particular space. And if we come to this side, you see that these farmers are clustered, which means they are sharing pieces of land, and also which will limit their production capacity given that the land is shared amongst a number of farmers, and also given that the land is split into smaller holdings or into smaller units, that will limit their capacity of generating profits. So if we are comparing the two, we have more reasons emanating from the side of AF being the one who has got potential, or being the farmer who has potential to reap more profits from the activities that do happen in that particular farmland. So in this instance, our argument is that it's A, settlement A is the one that is more likely to generate a profit because of the given reasons there. They can engage in large scale farming, they have got large piece of land, and also the wind pump here evident can also be used to substantiate the fact that they are the ones who are most likely to get profits from the operations of primary activities in that particular settlement. Right, we move on to question number 1.14. The river caused the settlement at C to have a dash shape. I think we have earlier on discussed about that before we attempted the questions. This river, because of the influence of this river, how has it impacted on the shape of the settlement? If you are looking at the farmsteads here, you can see there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4. These farmsteads are situated in a line along the river. So the response there, the shape of the settlement is, the river caused the settlement at C to have a dash shape. We are saying the shape is influenced by the river, and the river is making the units to come in a linear form. So they are in line along the river, so implying that the nature of the shape of the settlement there is linear. Right, we move on to the next question, which is 1.15. The shape of the settlement at F is, right, we go to F, we check here what kind of shape is it. When we talk of pattern, I think we now know the difference between a pattern of a settlement and a shape. Here we want the shape. Definitely it was, if it was asking about the pattern, we would say it's clustered because the units are close to each other, but we want the shape. What kind of shape is formed here? You see we have units coming from this side, they get to the junction, they branch. And also we have units coming from this side, they get to they branch like this, giving us a T shape. So in this instance, that kind of a settlement shape is a T junction type of settlement, influenced by the intersection of this route coming from this side. It's meeting with this other route which is going from the southeastern to the northwestern part of the mapped area here. So it's a T junction settlement based on what we have observed there. Right, is having a T junction shape. Right, to move on to the next question, which is D is located on high ground due to the threat of flooding and is called a dash settlement. Right, let me clarify before we answer these two questions, so that maybe we are able to figure out how we are saying it's the correct response and how we are saying the other response is not correct. Right, we have two types of settlement according to relationship to water. Settlements, remember, are established also in relationship to water. But the difference that we need to note here, we have two classifications of settlements relationship with water. Number one, we have what we call a dry point settlement. And then number two, we have what we call a wet point settlement. Between these two, one of these two settlements is established at a point which is safe from threat of flooding. We establish a site of a settlement after considering the safety of the place in relationship to risk of flooding. So that is what we call a dry point settlement. The settlement is established at that particular site because it's a safer site when we talk of the risk of flooding. So it's a dry point settlement, and it's located at a place, usually a higher ground, which is not at risk of flooding. That is a dry point settlement. And when we talk of a dry point settlement here, we are not saying there is no water, but we are saying we are settling there because it's safer from the risk of flooding. That is a dry point settlement. Then we look at the wet point settlement. The reason for the establishment of this point here, of this settlement, is for easy access to water as a resource. We establish this settlement so that we can easily access water as a resource. The typical example that I can give for this one, let's say for example we are in an arid region, we are in a desert area. It does not make sense for a settlement to be established maybe 5 kilometers away from the water source, so that you can travel every day to go and get water 5 kilometers to and from. That doesn't make sense. We have to locate as close as is possible to the source of water, because that region, water is scarce. In that particular region, water is a scarce resource. Therefore, we need to locate as close as is possible to the water source so that we are able to access it. So that becomes a wet point settlement. For example, in dry areas, settlements that are established close to the oasis, the place where we can access water in an arid region, those are wet point settlements. So that's the difference between the two. Dry point, we are locating at a place which is safer from risk of flooding. Wet point, water is a scarce resource. We have to locate close to the available water resource. Right. Let's try to make sense from our two questions. D is located on high ground due to the threat of flooding and is called a dash point settlement. A dash settlement. From our responses, the correct response is dry point. Is at a place which is safer from the risk of flooding or from the threat of flooding. So is a dry point settlement. Then E is close to a supply of water and is referred to as, for E now, is a wet point. We want to access water. The reason for the establishment of that particular settlement over that ground is that we can access the resource easily. That is why we are calling it a wet point settlement. Right. So basically that is the distinction of establishment of a settlement in relation to water. Right. Then quickly we need to move on to the next question on our section 4 for settlement studies. Right. And the other thing is when you're in the examination, you should try to maximize the marks that you can get from these short questions by just being very quick to reason and being very quick to remember some of the aspects, because these questions are the ones where you should maximize on the marks and try to get maximum marks for these short objective questions. Right, we move on to the next section, which is question number 1.2. It's a question on multiple choice type of questions. Right, we are going to go through the questions quickly and try to identify the correct responses and try to make some explanations as to why we are saying those responses are the ones which are correct. Right, we go to the first question, number 121. It talks about a dash is an area where a group of people live that has buildings, communication network, and functions. Right, that is the simplest definition of a settlement and nothing else there. Settlement is an area where a group of people live that has got buildings, and communication network, and functions. That is a settlement. If we are to define situation and site, I think we also need to define these two. When you talk of a site of a settlement and a situation of a settlement, those two concepts are a little bit different. They are different, but we should distinguish between them. A site, that is the actual ground. When we're talking of a site, we're looking at the actual ground where a settlement is established. And situation, we are looking at the location of a settlement in relation to its surrounding environment. How the settlement relates to the other environment surrounding it, that is the situation of a settlement. So basically, that's the distinction between those two aspects that needs to be clear. But the correct response for that one, we have figured out that it's a settlement. We move on to the next question, which is question number 122. The dash is the process whereby an increasing percentage of people live in urban areas as compared to rural areas. Right, is the process whereby an increasing percentage of people live in urban areas and as compared to rural areas. There are two concepts that need to be clarified based on such geographical concept of urbanization and level urbanization and rate of urbanization. We need to clearly clarify on those aspects and make them clear as is possible so that we demystify the confusion that learners usually go through. When you're talking of urbanization, let me start by giving the response to this one. The correct response for this one is urbanization. For this question, our correct response comes here. Right. Why are we saying it's urbanization? We are saying the process whereby an increasing percentage of people live in urban areas compared to rural areas. That is the process of urbanization, when people are now moving and preferring to stay in cities and towns. And we now have a situation whereby there are now increasing percentage of people living in cities and towns compared to people who are staying in rural areas. These other concepts here, urban growth and urban sprawl, they are also geographical concepts that we might need also to explain on. When we're talking of urban sprawl, we are looking at uncontrolled growth of cities and towns, or it's rather some form of formless growth of cities and towns. For example, when we have informal settlements sprouting and growing, it's an example of urban sprawl. They are formless and they are unplanned for. So just a situation whereby the urban area grows without a particular defined form or defined shape. So it's a formless, or we can say it's shapeless, or it's uncontrolled growth. The urban area just grows anyhow, in any direction, without a formal plan, without following a proper plan. Then urban growth is the increase in the numbers of people in urban areas. There is a difference between urban growth and urban expansion. Urban growth, we are looking at people. When the urban area is having more and more people, that is urban growth. More and more people preferring to stay in urban areas. We are having more people in urban areas. That is an urban growth situation. So we are seeing the difference here. We are not comparing to any way. We are just looking at the urban area. And we are saying in the urban area, there are more and more people who are staying there. that is urban growth. The urban area is growing because there are more people who are staying in the urban area. We are not comparing to rural areas. The moment we put the aspect of comparing to rural areas, we're now saying there are more people who are staying in urban areas as compared to there are now more people who are staying in urban areas as a percentage compared to the people in rural areas. Now we are going back to urbanization. Right. So urban growth is different from urban expansion in this sense here. Growth, we are saying, is we are looking at the perspective of people in the city or in the town. There are more people who are staying in the city. But when it's expansion, we are looking at the physical growth. It's no longer about people here. We are looking at physical growth. Remember, as the urban area grows, there are more buildings, there is more infrastructure being introduced. So that expansion of the physical outlay of the buildings, or the expansion of the peripheries of the urban area, is what we call the urban expansion. Right. Basically, that is it. Let's move on to the next question. Right. The next question is talking about the formless growth of urban areas. I think earlier on we have discussed about that. When you talk of formless growth or shapeless growth or uncontrolled growth of cities and towns, we are looking at the situation of urban sprawl. Right, we move on to the next question, number 124. The physical growth of an urban settlement is referred to as, I think we've also discussed this. This is expansion. We have tried to define between the two. Right, this is urban expansion. Then an increase in the number of people living in urban areas is known as, you are now seeing the difference between these two questions. The increase in the number of people living in urban areas is known as. This question is not the same as this question here. Is the process whereby an increasing percentage of people live in urban areas compared to rural areas is not the same. We cannot give the same response to these two questions because they are not the same. The increase in the number of people living in urban areas is known as, that is urban growth, like what we have earlier on explained. Right. We move on to the next question, which is number 126. The largest increase in the level of urbanization in South Africa is from, we are comparing the years here, from which year to which year. So which means we are taking 2018 to 2019. We subtract these two. 66.9, we subtract 66.4. It gives us 0.5. If we are to take from this one to this one, which means here our percentage increase is for this option, it's 0.5. Then we move on to 2019 to 2020. 2019 is 66.5, 2020 is 67.2. We also try to figure out the difference between the two, which gives us a difference of 0.3. If you had to say 67.2 minus 66.9, we get a difference of 0.3. Then we go on to the next item, 2020 to 2021. 2020 is 67.2, then 2021 is 67.9. If you check the difference there, it's 0.7. Then we move on to the last, 2021 to 2022. It was 67.9. It went on to 60, up to 68.3. So the difference here is 0.4 again. So we want the one with the biggest increase, which means this one is the one which has got the largest increase from 2020 to 2021. Right, which is option number, item C. Response number C. Right, move on to the next question. Number 127. The dash of urbanization refers to the pace at which urbanization takes place. The dash of urbanization refers to the pace at which urbanization takes place. So the correct response there is the rate of urbanization. The rate of urbanization refers to how it takes place. Right, we move on to the next question. The advantages of counter-urbanization for urban areas are decreased what and what. When we're talking of counter-urbanization, we need to maybe clarify on this concept here. When we're talking of counter-urbanization, is the reversal of rural to urban migration. We have these people moving from rural going to urban areas. This is rural urban migration. Then we now have a reverse, urban to rural. This is now what we call counter urbanization. What is the advantages of having people now moving out of the urban areas going to the countryside or the rural and the surrounding farmlands? What will be the advantages? What will get decreased? Right. The correct response there is, if we check here, pollution will get to decrease. If we are having less people in the cities, it means they contribute towards reduction in the levels of pollution. So we take that response, it's correct. And we take this one here, land value. Land value is not an advantage for having a decrease in land value. Then we can also check the static appeal does not decrease. If there are less people, it means it is going to increase. How the urban area looks, it looks more beautiful with less people than being congested. Then there is also decreased traffic congestion. It's also correct. If there are less people, high chances of traffic congestion will also get decreased because the number of vehicles flying the routes are also going to decrease with the decrease in the size of the population. So item number 1 and item number 4 constitute to be our correct combination of responses which fall under a letter C. Right, we are done with this question, the multiple choice section. We need now to quickly move on to the section of the higher order, middle order and higher order questions, where we are now supposed to apply geographical logic and reasoning, and also where we are supposed to show that at least we are geographers who have learned something in class and who are studying and still being able to capture some geographical sense from whichever text they will be studying from. Right, let's look at this graph here. Refer to the graph and cartoon below showing rural urban migration. The title, if you check here, it says predicted or expected difference in the percentage increase of people that moved from rural to urban areas between 2000 and the year 2030. So we are having these different continents for 2000, and we are having the very same continents for 2030. On our vertical axis, you can see we have percentage living in urban areas, which means we are expressing the population as a percentage of, well, this is a percentage express of the people who are staying in urban areas as a fraction of the total people in that particular continent. So we see we have Asia, Africa, Europe, South America, and North America. That is for 2000. Then what is expected in 2030? The trends were like this in the year 2000, like you can see the title here. In 2000, those were the trends. But what is going to happen in 2030? We're going to have a new trend. According to the expected here or the predicted, this is what is going to happen around the year 2030 to those different continents in terms of the numbers of people who are moving into cities and towns. Right. Then if we come here, we also need to analyze what is happening on this cartoon here. You see there's this figure here. He's thinking about better jobs in the city. He's in the rural farmland and the mind is focused in factories in town. You can see there are factories here. He's imagining that the moment they follow this route, they will get there and attain better, be able to secure a better job in the city. That is what that figure is having in mind. Right. So let's check our first question. Question number 131. Which continent is predicted or expected to have the highest percentage of people that would move to urban areas between 2000 and 2030? This is a matter of checking and comparing the statistics that we have for each and every continent as in 2000 and as they expected for 2030. If you check for Asia, it's 37 in 2000 and is going to increase to 50 as in the year 2030. So you can see the difference there from 37 to 50. That is a difference of plus or minus is 13. If you subtract these two, 37, 50 minus 13 is a percentage increase of 13%. 13% more people will move as compared from 2000 to 2030. Then you check Africa is having 37 and is having 54. So you can see that there is a wider difference here. 54 minus 37, that gives us 17. Then if we check for Europe, Europe here has got 73 and has got 80 in 2030, the prediction. The difference here is just a difference of 7%. South America 76 and 85, which is also a difference of 9. From here, positive 9, 76 to 85. Then we look at North America from 79 to 84, which is also a percentage increase of 5%. So relating to our question here, we want the continent that will have the highest percentage of people that would move. So in this instance, our correct response is Africa. Africa is having 37, is expected to reach a high of 54 as in 2030 as the prediction. So it comes that our response for that one is for Africa. Then determine the predicted or expected difference in the percentage of people of the answer above that would have moved between 2000, right? So it's simply we are saying in 2000 is 37% and it is going to increase to 54%. We want the difference between these two. By how much? So it's like we are saying 54% minus 37%, which will give us 17%. That is how we do the calculation. We move on to the next question. Why would the rate of urbanization of the continent answer to above will be so high? Why do we have such level of such rates of urbanization being such high in Africa? But you look at it from the perspective of the push or the pull factors. You explain it on the perspective of either the push side or the pull side. If you explain it on the side of the push side, on the side of push factors, you look at what drives or what forces people away from rural areas. What is uncomfortable that make people want to move out of rural areas to go and stay into cities and towns? You can talk of things like lack of employment opportunities in rural areas. There are limited employment opportunities in the rural areas. It's a push factor that will force people to want to go to cities and towns in Africa so that they attain a better life. Like what that figure is thinking about, is thinking about better jobs in the city. So it means in the rural area, there will be lack of employment opportunities. Or we can also look at it from the side of a decline in production, in agricultural production. Agricultural production in most instances is declining in the rural areas, and remember those people mainly they rely on those primary activities. Then it means there's no more incentive for them to keep staying there if their core activity is no longer profitable for them. Or you can look at it from the side of poverty in the rural areas. Many people in the rural areas, they live in absolute poverty, and hence they need to better their lives by going to cities and towns. So there are so many that you can mention on the side of the push factors. Or you can talk of poor infrastructure in the rural areas, poor service provision, lack of housing. All those are factors that you can mention in on the side of the push factors, which will force people to want to go to urban areas. Or if you want to look at it from the pull side, we're now looking at what is in the urban area that attracts people to come from the countryside and want to join the residents of urban areas. You are converting the opposite of what you would have just said as push factors, like availability of job opportunities, or you can talk of better life in the cities or in urban areas, or you can talk of better services like education or health care is in most instances better in the cities and in the towns. So those are some of the reasons which are on the side of the pull factors. Better infrastructure in the urban area is a pull factor. Right, let's move on to the next question. Why does the pull factor indicated in the cartoon often lead to disappointment? The pull factor here is better jobs. This person here is attracted by better jobs in the city. They are thinking that the moment they set their foot in the urban area, they are going to find themselves securing a better job in the factory or somewhere in the industries. That is what they think in their mind. But the question is saying it will lead to a disappointment. How then will someone get disappointed given that they are having high hopes in them securing a job the moment they get to the city or the moment they get to the nearby town? How will it become a disappointment to such kind of a person who has got such high hopes? Right, the first question, the first thing that you need to note is there is limited jobs available in the cities and in the towns. This mentality here doesn't hold the reality. Better jobs in the city, there are limited employment opportunities, which means that will become a disappointment. The moment you get there, you tend to find that there are so few jobs, because remember, the economy is not growing at the same pace which will compensate the level of urbanization. The rate of urbanization is such fast, and the economy is not growing at such a pace to accommodate all those people who are moving into cities and towns. So there's limited employment opportunities in the urban area. That can be a disappointment. And also we can talk of a skills mismatch, or maybe the level of education. Right. When we talk of skills mismatch here, we are saying, let me just indicate the points. Right, we are saying skills mismatch. Skills might mismatch. You think the skills that you have or that you are bringing to the urban area are relevant to what is happening in the urban area, or to find that your skills are not even required by any employer in the urban area. Maybe you have skills in some particular field, you are specializing in maybe some primary activities that you are focusing on in the rural area, then you want to go to an urban area, and then you tend to find that the sector which is dominant in that urban area maybe is mainly a secondary sector where people are involved in manufacturing processes, and also the tertiary sector where you find people working in banks, you find people being employed in several service provision sectors. So you tend to find that your skills won't be relevant to such. So those hopes will end up being a disappointment. You go all the way to an urban area hoping that you are going to fit there, then all to find that your skills are not relevant. They are not matching to what the urban area requires. Or you can also talk of high unemployment in the cities. The moment you think of going to an urban area, you should ask yourself, the job that you want to go and try to find, there are other people who have been in the very same urban area for the past 2 years who are not working. They are failing to secure that kind of job. There is already high unemployment in the cities and towns. Then for you who is just coming today, you have come with high hopes that you are going to make it. not knowing that there are people who were already there before you who are not even employed. So that is also another disappointment that might come, that you tend to find that already in the urban area there are people who are not employed, who are trying so hard to secure those jobs, but they are failing to secure them. Then you can also check on competition. There are so many people looking for the same jobs that you hope to find there. So that competition is also going to be a disappointment. Sometimes you tend to find that you are overpowered in terms of maybe the level of experience or the level of skills that you have by some other people whom you are competing with for the same vacancy. So it acts as a disappointment to this figure here who is hoping to get better jobs in the city. Or we can talk of unaffordable cost of living. Cost of living in the urban area in most instances is high, which will also mean that when you are still on job hunting, that is going to be a very big challenge for you to sustain in the urban area while it's on the phase of job hunting. You still need to get the basics. You need to move from point A to point B. You need transportation, and you are not employed for that matter. And you still need to fend for the bills, like you need to pay rentals. All that constitute towards the burden of you failing to secure the job that you are hoping for, because the cost of living in the urban area will be way far higher. And given that you wouldn't have secured the job that you are hoping for, you are still beyond the phase of job hunting. That is going to be a very serious challenge that will lead to it being a disappointment. And you tend to find that some of such hopes will die and the person will reverse to go back to the rural area where they are used to. Right. Those are some of the disappointments that can come along and act as a hindrance to the fulfillment of such dreams by people from rural areas. Right. We'll move on to the next question, which says, suggest strategies that could be implemented in rural areas to reduce the rate of urbanization. What then can be done to rural areas so that we reduce the numbers of people who are moving from rural areas going to cities and towns? Right, that is a simple question that just requires open reasoning. Right, we can talk of improvement in service delivery, because the moment we are able to identify the cause of the movement, then we address the cause of the movement, then it means we are solving the problem. People are moving because of poor service. Then what should we do to the service provision? We should improve service delivery and provision in rural areas. Provide those services that are wanted by people. Maybe it's education, they are going to cities to attend schools which are better, or maybe it's healthcare. We offer such services to the rural areas, and those people, they have no incentive of moving away from such rural areas, because all what they are going to get in the urban area is now upon them in the rural area. So we talk of infrastructure development and upgrading of infrastructure, existing infrastructure. We talk of provision of basic services like education. We talk of electrification programs for rural areas. Provide electricity, provide clean water, provide basic sanitation in the rural areas. Those are some of the measures that can be implemented to try and retain the rural residents in their original space. Then we can also talk of improvements of the agricultural sector, maybe through introduction of irrigation farming, or you can talk of cooperative farming being introduced in the rural areas, because we're saying these people, they rely on the primary activities and predominantly agriculture. So we should try to resustain agriculture in the rural area so that it becomes profitable for the inhabitants of the rural area. For example, in those areas which are arid, if we are trying to implement irrigation farming, that will become viable for the residents in the rural area, and they wouldn't have any incentive to want to move out of their original areas of residence. Right, and we'll also talk of other things like that can be done. We can talk of industrial decentralization. We try to decentralize industries from industrial regions or industrial regions, and try to also develop some industries in parts of the rural communities, so that we create jobs for those people. Because remember, we have been mentioning about people hoping to go and find better jobs in the cities and towns. If there is industrial decentralization, it implies that those jobs will not be available for the people in the very same rural areas that they do want to move away from. So we do decentralization of industries. Right, those are some of the measures that can be implemented. We can talk of incentivizing people in rural areas. The government can maybe make an initiative to maybe pay some grants for people staying in rural areas so that they can sustain and they can find ways of making a living in their very own communities, right, as a measure to try and limit their movement into cities and towns. Right, that was question number 1.3. Right, we need to move on to the next question, which is question number 1.4. Question number 1.4 is based on the model of urban settlement, which is the multiple nuclei model, the model which was done by Harris and Ullman. Right, if you check this model here, it's indicating the different land use zones that we find in the urban area, and here they are numbered according to this numbering system which is used on the sketch here, and the key is indicated here to show which land use zone falls in which sector, numbered as per the sketch indicated on the left of your urban area. Right, so you tend to find that we have number 1, which is in the center, which is almost at the center of our urban settlement here. If you check number 1, the label for number 1 is there. Our number 1, we find it here. Our number 1 is the CBD, which is the Central Business District. Right, this is the commercial core of the urban settlement, where we tend to find that we have the concentration of the commercial activities in this particular zone here. That's the commercial heart of the urban settlement. And if you try to check from our urban settlement, you tend to find that your CBD falls here. This is where we get your CBD around this area here. And you can relate the features of the CBD, the surrounding environment. You can see the nature of the buildings that we have here. We have high-rise buildings. All these buildings, they are very tall buildings, high-rise buildings, for the reasons being that land is expensive in the CBD and there's no more space for horizontal expansion. You cannot expand horizontally in the CBD because the land is used up. The only space for expansion is to expand vertically, which means the height of the buildings will be so high, because that is the only way we can expand in the CBD given land limitation and also high land values. Right, and also if you check the density of the buildings, they are also dense within the CBD here for the same reasons that land is scarce in the CBD. There is no space to waste. All space is put to the best use and is put to a maximum use that returns to the owner of the space. Right, then we go to zone number 2. Number 2, we tend to find that is there. Zone number 2 is light industries. You can see from here. And if you try to pick it out from here, you can tend to find that our light industrial site might be there on that urban settlement as indicated there with our second numbering, which is number 2. Light industrial activities, I think you still remember about what happens in light industries. Right, light industries, we are looking at those kind of production that relatively do not require very large spaces and that do not cause high levels of pollution. For example, we can give examples of maybe clothing manufacturers. They fall part of the light industries. We can also talk of shoe manufacturers. They also fall part of that sector of industries. And also we can talk of maybe furniture manufacturers. Those are typical activities that do happen in the light industries. If you check their production process does not need much space, does not need a very big space, and also their level of pollution is relatively lower. They do not cause much pollution in forms of air pollution and noise pollution. That is why they are compatible to the CBD here. We are having our CBD at number 1, and the light industries we are tending to find that it's just close to the CBD. It's just occurring in close proximity to the CBD. For the reasons being, those activities, they do not cause much pollution, and hence they can be compatible with either residential areas or the CBD. Then we have the low income residential area, which is number 3 there. low income, we also tend to find that is closer to the light industries and also is closer to the CBD. For the reasons that these people here, they are low income, they tend to locate close to their source of to their workplaces rather, because many of them, they will be working in the light industries and some in the CBD. That is why this zone was created in this particular space there too, for ease access to the places of work either in the light industrial side or in the CBD. And also, given that these people are low income, we don't expect many of them to be having private vehicles to ply their routes going to different workplaces which are further away from where they are staying. That is why, for the reason, the zone is located just close to their workplaces, so that it's a walkable distance, or it's cheaper for them to commute to go to their workplaces here. Then we have middle income residential, which is number 4. Number 4, you can see where it is here, which is roughly this area here. You tend to find our middle income residential. So you are seeing that the middle income is now a little bit far away from the CBD and also the light industries. They are now further away. This middle income, remember, they have a better way or better life. They have a better life in the sense, and hence they locate a distance away from activities in the industries, like in the light industries, and also they locate a distance from the CBD. They usually have private ownership of modes of transport. They can easily drive and get to the CBD conveniently, given that there is increased ownership with increased level of income, ownership of modes of transport. The middle income, they can be able now to stay further away from the CBD and the light industries for the sake that they are now having private ownership of their own modes of transport. Then we have number 5. Number 5, zone 5 is here. You can see like this part here. This is the high income residential, what we call the suburban areas. These areas are now very far away from the CBD and on the outskirts of the city. You are seeing where zone number 5 is at the periphery of the city, on the outer edge of this city here. They are very far away from the central business district, for the very same reasons that even that these people have got high income, they definitely have their own modes of transport. They can drive into the CBD, and also because there is free space here, they tend to locate away where they can have a free space and healthy and clean environment away from pollution activities that are concentrated in the CBD and in the industrial areas there. And if you check also the nature of the housing units, you can see that the housing units are looking like they are very big units and they are spaced very far apart from each other. Right, then we go on to number 6, which is a heavy industrial site or function. Number 6, you tend to find it there, which implies that our number 6, you are picking it there. Then we have the outlying business district, which is number 7. Number 7 is here, close to the high income and in between the high and middle income. Number 7 is here, the outlying business district. Right, when we're talking of outlying business districts, we are looking at decentralization of commercial activities. Some businesses are now moving out of the central business district for the different centrifugal reasons that happen there, like for example, levels of traffic congestion within the CBD, level of crime, level of pollution in the CBD, competition, all those factors, they drive some businesses out of the core CBD here, and they tend to decentralize and locate in the outlying business district, like here. Right, then we go to the residential estate. That is number 8. You can see it's there. It's an independent on its own. Then we have number 9, the industrial estate. Industrial estate is number 9. Number 9 is here, which means the industrial estate is also there. So basically, that is the model that we are referring to. This model of multiple nuclei, model by Harris and Ullman. Right, let's go to the questions and try to figure out how best we can attempt such questions They were just interpreting the model and trying to figure out how it explains the distribution of different functions within an urban setting. Now we want to analyze the questions and try to figure out sense and see how we can best answer those questions using geographical sense. Right, number 141, it says state two characteristics of the multiple nuclei model evident in the sketch. We are looking at this sketch here. What is evident there that we can see and that we can use as a feature or a characteristic of the urban settlement model? Right, we can talk of the separation of functions. Functions are distinctively separated from one another. Like if we check here, there are boundaries which show us the demarcation of a given zone, which means from this illustration here, we have a distinct zone whereby there is one core activity that takes place. If it's a low income residential, it means that is the dominant activity that happens in that area. So from what we are seeing there, we are seeing that they are separated functions. And also let's check the CBD. The CBD is there. It also shows us that the CBD is at the core, is at the focal point of the settlement. Like what we are seeing there, activities are concentrated around the CBD. So the CBD is at the core. It's also evident. You can also see that from that illustration. And also it shows us that it's a multiple nuclei, as the name suggests, meaning to say that the city is organized around multiple centers. We have the core CBD here, and the activities are centered around the CBD. We have the outlying business district here. We also have activities happening around. This becomes a focal point for this area, and this also becomes a focal point for that particular area. So it implies that the multiple nuclei is shown there. We have a city which is organized around some multiple centers. With the growth of this city, we are likely to have another outlying business district growing somewhere. So it will also become a focal point for that region, and people will concentrate activities around that focal point. So the effect of a multiple nuclei is also evident on the sketch or on the illustration that is indicated there. Right, let's move on to number 142. Identify land use zone 1. Land use zone 1 is here. It's indicated that is the central business district, or basically the CBD, that is zone number 1. Central business district. That is zone number 1. Then account for the location of zone, let us zone 1. Account for the location. We are saying give reasons why it is located where it is. You are seeing that the CBD is at number 1 here and is encircled by zone number 3, there's zone number 2, there's zone number 3 again here, there's zone number 4 on this side, and the CBD is at the focal point, it's at the center. Why is it there, or what reason can we use to justify its existence on that part of the urban settlement? Right, number 1 we can say is the commercial center of urban settlement. Hence it should come at the core. Is the commercial center. All commercial activities are centralized and are happening in the CBD. So it means some other functions will occur or will happen around the commercial center. And then the CBD forms the core of the whole urban settlement. Because there is concentration of commercial activities in the center of the urban settlement, it also implies that other functions will tend to develop around the commercial core, which is the CBD. And also, it's easily accessible. It's linked by different transport routes which ply from different directions. So for that reason, it's the one that provides the services for the settlement and other functions, and hence they have to develop around it. The CBD being here at the center of the urban settlement, it implies that services that people want, they get them from here, and hence they have to locate surrounding where they get their services. Right, we move on to the next question, number 1.4.4. Explain how the development of the outlying business district OBD labeled number 7 was influenced by crime rates and traffic congestion. Right, we are analyzing the problem of the development of the OBD as a result of those urban settlement issues of crime rate and traffic congestion. We are relating them to the development of the outlying business district. So when we are explaining here, we are trying to figure out how this problem, this urban issue, contributed towards the establishment of this outlying business district which we find here. There is now an area which has got some commercial activities which are also provided in the core CBD there, but now these ones are in the outlying area. This one is in the outlying region. Why did it come there in relationship to crime? Crime rate here in the outlying business district, there is lower crime. There's lower crime in the outlying business district. We are comparing the CBD here, the main CBD there versus the outlying business district. And how does lower crime rates contribute towards establishment of that business district? Given that there is less crime rate, it's safer for businesses to operate in this zone here. It's safer for businesses to operate here because of less crime rate and hence the development of this outlying business district. And also for the safety of the customers. Customers are much more safer doing business here because there is less crime rate, which means it will attract more customers who fear for their valuables, who don't want to go to the CBD where crime is rife. And also if you try to look at it from the cost to business, remember, if there is high crime, businesses are also forced to incur high cost, like for example insurance. Insuring their properties, it will be costly if there is high crime rate in the area. So it also implies that businesses will be favorable to locate here because it's less costly in terms of payment of insurance is related to crime for their businesses. So that is basically what happens with the outlying business district. And if we check also, let's go to traffic congestion. How do we relate traffic congestion to the development of this urban outlying business district? Right, here there is less traffic congestion. Why is it that there's less traffic congestion in the outlying business district? Right, this has less traffic volume. Traffic volume is limited here. A lot of people, they do their businesses in the CBD, and hence there are so many vehicles that tend to go to the CBD. But the outlying business district, we have fewer people doing business in the outlying business district, and hence the volume of traffic is limited, and hence it's easily accessible because of limited or almost no traffic congestion. And also accessibility is easier because there's less traffic. It gives it easier accessibility by people doing business there or the customers who want to come and buy or acquire different services offered there. The roads are not congested. Then if we check also in terms of traffic congestion, basically in terms of traffic congestion it's fine. Talk also of like other contributing factors which will make this area develop into an outlying pronounced business district. Factors like level of pollution. You tend to find that there is less pollution in those outlying business districts, and people are more comfortable doing businesses in such places because it's more convenient for them and it's much healthier and easier for them to go about their normal businesses in such outlying business centers. Right. So we need to move on to the next question. Why will the multiple nuclei model depicted in the sketch not apply to all urban areas? Right, we're saying this model here, it applies where it applies. In some areas, it doesn't apply. Why is it not applicable to all urban areas? Right, there is a number one we can say. Cities are planned according to government policy. So if the government policy does not conform to what is here, it means that city can never resemble what is shown by that model. The government plans, or the local authority plans how the city should be structured. So if the plan is not compatible to how the model suggests the distribution of land use, it means that model cannot be applicable to that city or to that town. And also, if we check the level of development, this model can be applied to the Western world. It cannot be applied to cities in the developing world or in the third world because of the differences in the level of development. It does not apply to much of the low-income countries, cities in low-income countries or the third world. This model is not actually compatible with that. Then you can also look at it cannot be applied, or it cannot apply in all cities because it doesn't consider the historical background of the development of such cities. Like for example, talk of a South African city. Remember, we have another model which is a South African city, which is a symbol of how cities in South Africa look like. They are not they do not have the same setup as what this model suggests by these two guys, Harris and Ullman, because of the legacy of apartheid in South Africa. Remember, there was Group Areas Act where people were supposed to settle according to ethnicity, not because of level of income. So you tend to find that there were areas for black people and areas for white people, areas for the Indians, areas for the coloreds, because of the implication of apartheid, which will mean that this classification of residential areas according to level of income will not be compatible with South African cities, because South African people were not grouped according to their level of income, though to some extent, but basically they were grouped according to their races. So it ignores such historical background, and it means it cannot apply to some cities, like for example in South African cities, because of the legacy that was left by apartheid. Right, basically that's the idea behind such. Right, we go on to question number 1.5. Right, it's a text, it's an infographic with this picture here and what is indicated here. Right, we check the first question. Define the concept urban blight. Urban blight, a geographical concept, or in some instances you tend to find that besides using urban blight is indicated as urban decay. What is it that we call urban blight? We'll try to define it in simple terms. Right, basically when we're talking of urban blight, we're looking at the decline or the deterioration of urban areas. Urban areas are declining and they are deteriorating. The deterioration of urban areas, which is mainly seen in the form of crumbling infrastructure. Like if you see what this building is like, it's not in a good state. It's in a crumbling state. And also in the form of abandoned buildings. That is evidence of urban decay. So basically the situation of deterioration of an urban area, the area is deteriorating, is losing its value, and is having a situation of crumbling infrastructure, and is having abandoned buildings, and is having neglected buildings or neglect. That is basically the situation of urban blight. Like what this house suggests, it tells a lot about the problem of urban blight. Then give evidence from the photograph that urban blight has taken place. What can we see here which shows us that there is a problem of urban blight? Right, let's look at these windows here. You see how those windows look like, these windows here. Those windows are broken and are never replaced. They will just stay like that. So it's one evidence of these broken windows all over around that you are seeing here. And if you also check, this building shows lack of maintenance. The way it appears, you see, look here. If it was a maintained building, it would be having a uniform paint. But if you check there, it looks very old and looks unattended. So it's also evidence that the building shows lack of maintenance or is neglected. And if you also check here, the written tiger. There's no one who can go to someone's wall and just write the way they want, or just put some caption of whatever is in their mind on someone's building. This graffiti here also shows that there is urban blight taking place. You cannot have a proper building in an urban area being written, however, or being written some fun text. So it's also evidence that we are having urban blight taking place. And if you check around the area here, there's evidence of polluted land. There is evidence of dumping taking place there. So that is evidence of urban blight that you can see. There is every physical evidence of littering around. People just litter anyhow. They don't mind. They don't take responsibility over the environment that they are living in. So that is evidence of urban blight that you can see. Or if you can figure out some other forms of evidence, yes, they might also be there. I might not be able to see everything and sum up everything, but those are some of the pieces that I have managed to track and expose. Right, let's move to the next question. Why is urban blight more dominant in the transition zone or zone of decay than in other land use zones? There is a specific zone whereby urban blight is much pronounced. That zone of transition where we are moving from the CBD going to some residential areas. That zone where there is a mix of functions, where there is, it's not a very clear function, it's a zone where we have one dominating activity, but we tend to find that there is an intermixing of different functions of the urban settlement happening within the same zone. That is the zone of transition, which immediately falls on the periphery of the central business district. Why is it that we have urban decay happening in that particular zone? Right, number one is for the reason that its proximity to the CBD. This area is closer to the CBD and is exposed to the dangers of massive urbanization. So we are saying its proximity is closer to the CBD. And it being closer to the CBD is the one that suffers the consequences of the negative impacts of rapid urbanization. For example, pollution. To be specific, let's say land pollution here. People in the CBD, sometimes if there is ineffective refuse removal, they tend to dump their waste in this zone. It's just slightly outside where they operate, and they tend to do illegal dumping in such areas, such that at the end of the day, the area becomes an area which is not pleasing, which is deteriorating. And also crime is also at risk of criminal activities happening in the CBD. People who do criminal activities, they will find their haven or their hiding places somewhere in that zone outside the CBD. So its proximity to the CBD will give it a disadvantage, and it will end up having such negative implication. And also, if we look at the owners of such buildings, the owners basically they do nothing to repair and replace the old buildings. Why don't they take care and repair those old buildings? They will be speculating. Remember, that is the future of the CBD. The transition zone is the future of the CBD. The CBD, if it expands into the zone of transition. So the owners of such properties in the zone of transition, they speculate. They just keep the buildings for the sake of keeping them, hoping that in future there is going to be that transition. There is going to be that change process whereby the land value is going to benefit them when more commercial activities are now invading the zone of transition. So it's also a perception of speculation by the owners. They do not maintain the buildings. They do not want to incur extra costs, hoping that in future they are going to reap the benefits of increased land values as the CBD encroaches into the zone of transition. Right, and also we can look at other factors like industrial decline. The industries have declined. Remember, the zone of transition was previously the home for the industries. People working in the light industries, they are the ones who usually stay in the zone of transition. And some of them even working in heavy industries, they were staying in that zone of transition. And given now that there is some situation of industrial decline, if the industries are declining or they are relocating to some other places, it means those buildings that were previously occupied by the people who were working in the industries are now being abandoned, because the people are also moving following their source of employment. If the company is relocated from that particular settlement, it was the major company which was having people working for it and staying in that zone, and the company is relocated. It means automatically those people cannot be easily replaced, and those buildings will end up being neglected and will end up facing a state of deterioration. And also zoning and land use uncertainty. Zoning and land use uncertainty. We said this zone has got mixed functions, so the future of this zone is not very predictable. It's very uncertain, such that people do not want to invest much in that particular area. For example, if you think of investing, you want to buy a property in the zone of transition, maybe to use for maybe residential purposes. You want to buy a building in that zone, you repair it and you maintain it and use it for residential purposes. What if the function changes? In future, maybe the town planners, they decide that we no longer want residential functions around this area. Land is becoming more scarce. We want to only occupy this area with commercial activities. Then what was going to happen to your investment? So that issue of zoning and land use uncertainty is also a factor that people will end up neglecting those buildings. They do not want to invest much in them, for they are not sure of what is going to happen to such an area in the future because of the differences in the land use that might be implemented in the very same area. And also you can talk of absent landlords, what we call the absentee landlordism. Absentee landlordism. Right, we are saying the landlords of these properties or the owners of these properties, in most instances, they are absent. They don't stay in that zone, because people who own properties in that particular zone, most of them maybe they are affluent people who are rich. They are staying in the suburban areas. They are staying in the high income areas. And for them not being physically present on their premises, they tend to not pay much attention on the buildings. What they can only pay attention is receiving their rentals, maybe at the end of the month, if they are using such properties for rental purposes. That's what they can expect. But taking physical action on repairing the buildings in their absence, that is a long process. So mainly those people, they do not stay in that zone. They are absent from where the buildings are located. They don't stay in the very same buildings, and hence they cannot keep an eye on everything that happens on their buildings, given that they won't be physically present in that particular area. Right. We move on to the other question. We are done with our question form. No, not done. We are going to finish number 1.5.4. The last question, the 8-mark question on settlement geography. In a paragraph of approximately 8 lines, explain the positive impact of gentrification on the transition zone. Right, it talks about gentrification in the text there. I don't know if it's clear or if it's fully described what the process of gentrification is. Right, it says city neighborhoods such as the Maboneng, Precinct, and Fordsburg have a fast developing modern feel about them. Rental prices within them have increased accordingly. This is due to improvements to attract more middle-income residents. The process of gentrification resulted in the renovation of old buildings. The social illustrated by a wave of evictions of the original residents who have lived in unsafe and abandoned buildings, often for decades because they could not afford better accommodation. Right, so it's explaining the process of gentrification. Right, basically what we call gentrification, we are looking at a situation whereby there are now wealthier people who have got higher incomes and who are more affluent. They are now moving into areas that were previously low income areas. Someone is moving from a higher class, is a high class individual who is opting to move to an area whereby much of the people in that particular section are low income people. And what is the implication of that? Those people, if they are working, they are moving towards that area of low income people, and also they are moving towards in the working class neighborhood. It will imply that there will be a change in what will happen in that particular area. If more people come in, people who are of a higher status, they are moving towards an area that was predominantly occupied by low income people. That is going to cause a transition, that is going to cause a process of change in the way through which things are done in that particular area. And we can talk of positive changes that can be noted. For example, the area's culture is going to change. If lower income people are having a culture of maybe hooliganism and destruction of the environment and not taking care of the environment, then wealthier people are joining in that particular society. It will mean that the culture is going to change. The culture of the area is going to be changed gradually. People will start taking responsibility over the environment. And it also means that the demographics are also going to change. The demographic situation is also going to change, and also the economy at large is also going to change. If it was an area dominated by poor people, it means the economy will be lowly performing. And once more people get in, people who are of a higher status, that will mean that the economy will start to revitalize and get back to working. Right, that is the process of gentrification. Right, so what is the implication of gentrification on the transition zone? If you're having more affluent people, more wealthier people getting to stay in the zone of transition, what is going to happen? Right, we want to look at the positive impact of gentrification in that zone. How is it going to be transformed positively by the coming of wealthier people to stay in that zone? Right, when talk of revitalizing of neglected area, the area is going to be revitalized. It was neglected, but now given that there are affluent people who are coming to the area, it means we have a situation of revitalizing of neglected area. Some of the buildings which were neglected, they are now going to be reclaimed and they are now going to get back to new life. Introduces new life to the decaying area. The area was not maintained, but now given that there are people who are responsible, who have joined, who have opted to stay in the area, they're going to bring new life to the decayed buildings and they're going to revitalize the neglected area. It's going to get back to life. And how is it also going to impact? It's also going to impact on increasing property values. Like what is indicated in the text there. There were so many people who had stayed in that particular area, but however, they were forced to move out because they could not afford the new property values that were now in place because of gentrification process. So increasing property values are going to increase. And that is to the benefit of the zone of transition. if you are now having properties which are valuable, unlike just having neglected buildings which are in a dilapidated state and where there is high pollution and high crime levels, now the area is revitalized, is now having higher property values. That is a positive implication, because there are new residents and new buildings that are going to, new businesses that are going to come. They are going to upgrade the property values of the area and making the area more attractive. The area becomes more attractive for investment. No one wants to do business where there's no potential for viability of the business. But now, given that we now have wealthier people in that locality, it will also mean that investors can now target the area for the different forms of investments, because now there's potential for business growth in the area. And we can also talk of improved infrastructure. Infrastructure is going to be improved in the area. Infrastructure. The area was neglected, but now, given that we have affluent people who have joined in the area, they are now going to do maintenance and repair of some infrastructure in the area. For example, lighting. Street lighting in this zone of transition, usually tend to find that the street lights are broken and are not working. But now, given such coming of the people, we tend and expect to find that they are going to improve the infrastructure. Such examples like the street lights can get back to working, as an example, or you can talk of maybe the street sidewalk. The walkways are also going to be maintained because of gentrification process. And what else can we talk about? We can talk of enhancing the local economy. The local economy was dying. Businesses were moving out because of fear of criminal activities and also because of lack of potential customers in the area. But now the economy is now revitalizing because there are now affluent people in the area and who are also going to create jobs for the people around. So we have a job creation happening, and people in the zone of transition are being in a position to secure jobs for themselves in that particular area because of the coming in of investors into the zone of transition. Then we have the other benefit. You can talk of reduced crime. The zone of transition, remember, it's a zone which is dominated by neglected buildings where people illegally occupy. Such people, usually they are criminal acts. They do criminal acts and they are now going to move out of the area, given that the properties are now being taken care of and the land values are now getting higher. They can no longer keep on affording staying there, or they can no longer keep on illegally occupying such buildings. So which will also mean that crime levels are also going to get reduced, and that is going to have a positive implication on the society of the people in the zone of transition. Right, those are some of the responses that are possible to such. And you can also mention of other aspects like increased diversity. There's increased diversity. We now have people of different levels of income staying in the same locality, which will also contribute towards the diversity of the area. Unlike having an area which is fully occupied by low income level people only. And also can talk of improvement in services, improved services in the area. The coming of the people from the affluent areas and coming of high income people is also going to contribute towards better service provision. For example, you can talk of healthcare is going to improve. If, for example, the healthcare institution had vacated the area for the various reasons and for the reasons of decay, now we can have a reintroduction of the same service and them being viable, given that we now have people of a higher level of income in the very same area. So it's going to assist in the provision of a better and quality services in the zone of transition. Right, those are some of the responses to the paragraph question. And when you're answering the paragraph question, you should answer it in full statements and not in bullet form, because the question says in a paragraph. So which implies that when you're writing a paragraph, it's continuous writing, and you should raise at least 4 points. That is the minimum for you to get 8 marks. If you write 4 independent points which are fully explained and they make geographical sense, then that's what can guarantee you to get 8 marks. But it is also advisable that you even write more than 8 marks in case you repeat the same concept, thinking that you have created a new different point or an independent point, but you have just repeated the same point. So the more the number of points that you present in your paragraph, the more secure will it be in terms of acquiring the marks for that particular section of a paragraph question. Right, we'll move on to the next question, which is question number 2 on economic geography South Africa. Right, it's looking at industrial regions for South Africa. We have the contribution that they make towards the economy of the country, contribution to GDP by each industrial core region. Right, we have Durban, Pinetown, Southwestern Cape, Gauteng, PVW, and Port Elizabeth, Uitenhage. Right, the first question is, which core industrial region contributes the lowest percentage? That is just an extraction question. We just check on the contributions made by the different industrial regions here. This is 16.3, 14.2, 35.2, and lastly we have 7.9. So the lowest basically is Port Elizabeth, Uitenhage, which is option B. It's the one that is contributing the least amongst the industrial regions indicated there. Right, number 1212, the dash is the main source of water for Gauteng PVW core industrial region. We are saying the industries around Gauteng, the PVW, where do they get their supply of water from? Right, the supply of water for the PVW is the Vaal Dam. That is where they get their water for their different operations. Right, then we move on to the other question, which is next question 2.1.3. right, it says access to dash is an advantage of Port Elizabeth Uitenhage core industrial region compared to the Gauteng PVW core industrial region. What is the advantage in terms of access that is enjoyed by the PE Uitenhage industrial region compared to Gauteng? Right, the response which is correct there is harbors. Right, the Port Elizabeth Uitenhage has good access to the harbors, while Gauteng, remember, is inland and it does not have direct access to the harbor. So the harbors is an advantage that the Port Elizabeth Uitenhage has over Gauteng PVW. So for this one, the response is response number D. And here the response is number C. Then we'll move on to the next question, which is question 214. Dash is the main industry located in the Gauteng PVW core industrial region. Right, the major activities that take place here in the Gauteng industrial core region is basically iron and steel industry. That is the dominant activity that takes place in this core industrial region. Then 215, we're looking at the Kwega Industrial Development Zone, the IDZ. I think we also need to check on the IDZ and the SDI. The IDZ and the SDI, these are two different concepts that are usually mistaken by the learners. Right, the IDZ is what we call the Industrial Development Zone, and the SDI is the Spatial Development Initiatives. Those two are not the same. Right, we're going to explain the differences between the IDZ and the SDI. I think there's another question which relates to a Spatial Development Initiative at the Wild Coast. That is going to be a section that we're going to illustrate how those two tend to differ. Right, for the sake of this question here, let's attempt to answer the question directly. Right, the Kwega Industrial Development Zone is found in the dash core region. Is found in the Port Elizabeth Uitenhage industrial region. So the response which is correct for that question is response number B. That is where we find the Kwega Industrial Development Zone. Right, we move on to number 216. The main raw materials found in the Gauteng PVW co-industrial region. What raw materials are found within this Gauteng area, and which are also the components of production processes taking place in industries that do exist around the Gauteng PVW region. Right, our first response is gold, which is probably correct response. Fruit. Gauteng being a commercial industrial region, we do not have much farming activities taking place around here. So fruit cannot be regarded as one of the major raw materials that are used in production processes around the industries in Gauteng. Then iron ore. Iron ore is probably a correct response, given that we have so many mines around and activities taking place. The dominant activity is iron and steel, which means we must be having vast supplies of iron ore around the industrial core region. Then we have fish resources. Given that Gauteng is inland and has got very limited water bodies, we cannot talk of fish being one of the major raw materials that are used in the production processes happening around Gauteng. So the correct combination counts to be response number 1 and matched with response number 3, which is a combination of gold and iron ore, which falls under response B. Then number 217, we move on to the next question, which is 217. Check 217 says, the dominant industrial activities in the Port Elizabeth Uitenhage co-industrial region. What is the major activity that happens in the Port Elizabeth industrial region? Right. The major activities is chemicals and metal processing. Chemicals and metals processing. That is the response to that question. Chemicals and metals processing, which comes as response number response item B for that question. Right, with response item B. Right, we can move on to the next question. 218. The disadvantages of industrial centralization to the Gauteng PVW co-industrial region are: what is the disadvantage of concentrating industries in Gauteng? It's number 1, water shortages. It's a probable correct response. A small labor force. This cannot be a correct response. There are so many people around who are willing to work and who are able to work. Small markets. This cannot be a probable disadvantage. The markets are very big. There are so many people who are willing to buy products from such industries. Air pollution. This is probably a correct response. Because industries are centralized, they cause more pollution. Because industries are also centralized, they compete for the limited water resources. So item number 1 made with item number 4, which is response C. Right. That is basically the multiple choice section of our first part. We need to move on to the other part, which is the part on the other question which follows after this. It's question number 2.2. Right, quickly going through the question. It's a question which requires us to match the column A versus column B with the responses Y and Z for each item. Right, this one we are going to do it quickly. The difference between the formal and the informal sector. Right, the formal sector we are looking at the formally registered businesses, and the informal we are looking at mainly those ones who are self-employed, who are not formally registered by the authorities. Right, the term used for unregistered businesses, the question is saying unregistered. When something is unregistered, it means it falls under the informal sector here, which is Z. Characteristic of the informal sector: workers are self-employed or workers are employed by national enterprise. Workers are self-employed in the informal sector. They do their own thing. Right, move on to the next question. 223, reason for high number of immigrants entering the informal sector. Why do we have so many people from other countries contributing towards the numbers in the informal sector and not the formal sector? Right, the response there, correct response is why? Lack of documentation. Without proper documentation, you cannot join the formal sector because you need to be properly documented if you are an immigrant. Right, then number 224, example of an informal sector, we have pep stores and car guards. Right, definitely pep store is a registered business which is operating almost everywhere around South Africa. We cannot say it's an informal, but car guarding, the car guards, that is an informal sector. Then we move on to 225, benefit for consumers buying goods from an informal trader. Why is it beneficial for buying goods from an informal trader? The correct response is Z. Goods can be purchased at a lower price. Then we move on to the next question, 226, reason for the growth of the informal sector in South Africa. Why are we having so many people in the informal sector in the current situation of South Africa? Right, the correct response there is why? Limited jobs available in the formal sector. Given that the formal sector is failing to absorb all the potential workers, then people are resorting to finding a way out on their own through the informal means. Then a challenge facing the informal sector. What challenge does the informal sector face? Correct response is Z, which is exposed to harsh weather conditions. Mainly tend to find that the people in the informal sector, they do not have formal places to operate from, or they do not have formal shelters to operate from, and hence they will end up facing such a challenge of harsh exposure to harsh weather conditions. On a rain day, it's raining, you are on the streets. On a hot day, it's very hot, you are on the street again. On a cold day, on a wind day, so they get exposed to harsh weather conditions. Right, we go on to the question of food security. There is a graph which shows a global food insecurity. Insecurity in this instance, number of people in millions, and the trend of food insecurity you can see there, 198, 368 going upwards like that. Let's go to questions. Right, state the trend evident on the graph with regard to global food insecurity from 2019 to 2023. What is the trend here? What's the trend shown on this graph? When the question says the trend, it says interpret what is happening there. It means, is it maintaining constant? Is it increasing? Is it decreasing according to what you see from the graph? So the trend here, if you check, the trend is increasing. The general trend that you can see there is that there is increasing food insecurity. So basically, the response for that one is increasing. Then according to the extract, what are the reasons for the trend shown on the graph? According to the extract, right? The extract gives us the reasons here, right? Largely linked to climate change. It's one factor. The COVID pandemic is another factor which is leading to food insecurity, and lastly, poverty. Those are the three factors indicated there that are contributing towards food insecurity. There is climate change, then there's the COVID pandemic, and lastly, there is poverty. Right, that is the response to 232. Then 233, what positive impact could the global food trade restriction measures have on South Africa? If we are restricting food trade, it means we are limiting the volumes of food products getting out of the country. What is the benefit of that? Right? It implies that if we introduce such, it is going to have a positive impact on the South Africa economy. How does it reap positive benefits? It means it will increase domestic or local supply. If we are restricting exportation of food products out of the country, it means the local market or the domestic market is going to have an increase in the supply, and hence people will get sufficient and nutritious food for a healthy life. Right, we move on to the next question. 234. Explain how two physical factors negatively impact South Africa's food production. Physical factors, we are looking at natural factors in that instance. How two physical factors negatively impact on South Africa's food production. The physical factors that we can mention here, you can talk of physical factors like climate change. It's a physical factor. When the climate is changing, we are looking at a situation whereby we are having frequent droughts now. Because of climate change, we are having frequent droughts. If we have a frequent drought, it means the frequent droughts are going to affect crop yields. Frequent drought affects crop yields. We cannot have high yields if there is a drought situation. Or we can talk of climate change in the form of now we are having frequent flooding. Those floods are going to affect, because they are going to affect the farmlands and are going to affect the yields. Then we can also talk of other physical factors like land degradation. The land is gradually being degraded, and land degradation is contributing towards low yields. The soil is losing its fertility and now is no more productive enough to produce enough food. So that is going to contribute towards low yields again because of soil fertility loss. Then we can also talk of other factors like the topography. Topography of the area is also a physical factor that can affect. We look at some areas where there are steep slopes. Those slopes are very difficult to do agricultural production or to do successful agricultural production. And hence, at the end of the day, we tend to find that we do not manage to have sufficient food reserves. And also, maybe we can talk of water scarcity. It's also another physical factor. The scarcity of water. If we are having a situation of scarcity of water, we cannot access water, it hinders irrigation. Once irrigation is not viable, it means we cannot get sufficient food. That will contribute towards food insecurity. Water scarcity is going to hinder effective crop production or livestock production. It's either way. You cannot have effective livestock production or effective crop production because of scarcity of water. So basically, those can be some of the responses are the physical factors that hinder, that are likely to hinder food security. Right, we move to the next question. 235. Suggest measures that the government can implement or put in place to support in achieving food security in South Africa. What can the government do to ensure that all people have got sufficient and nutritious food for a healthy life? What should we do? Right. The government, what can it do? It can encourage, for example, cooperative farming in the farming communities. Encourage cooperative farming amongst the farmers. If farmers do cooperative farming, there are high chances of them reaping positive results because of shared effort, unlike farmers working independently on fragmented lands. So cooperative farming can work, and you can also talk of enhancement of farmers of skills. Some of the farmers, they do not have the right skills to do effective production, so the government should maybe do some skills training, skills development programs for farmers. If farmers are equipped with the right skills, it means it can be beneficial for them to acquire such skills and being able to employ the skills for the benefit of the country at large, because they will be productive, highly productive enough. You can also think of skills development, or can talk of it in forms of education and training. We send our farmers to training institutions so that they acquire the right knowledge about how to manage farming businesses. But you can also think of it in the on the side of affordable credit for farmers, or introduce low-cost loans. If farmers have got access to finance, they can now be able to finance their farming operations and be able to come out with good production from their operations. So if we afford them low-cost loans or affordable credit, that means the farmers can acquire whatever inputs they want or what they want to use in their production processes, and hence enhancing agriculture. Or we can talk of irrigation farming. The government can try to introduce irrigation farming. Given the rainfall trends now, it's no longer viable to rely on the precipitation from nature as it stands, because now there are frequent droughts. So if we can introduce irrigation farming, I think that can also help to cater for production during the dry seasons or during periods of below average amounts of rainfall. And then maybe we can also talk of lucrative producer prices. If farmers are going to get better prices for their products, they are also going to be motivated to produce more. If the producer price is economic, the farmers will tend to put more effort in production and in an effort to benefit from their operation. So it's also a positive implication. And you can also talk of subsidizing farmers, subsidies to farmers. The government can issue and give out subsidies to the farmers so that they can enhance productivity, and the result is positive for the whole of the country, and we do away with the problem of food insecurity. All right, move on to question 2.4, which is a question on platinum mining. Right, it has a text and a map. Right, we won't waste time looking at the infographic. We'll go straight to the questions. Right, what is the percentage of the world's platinum reserve? What percentage of the world's platinum reserves does South Africa have? This is a simple extraction question. If we come here, we find the answer here. Mining for platinum group metals PGM is widespread over South Africa and holds over 80% of the world's reserves. We are done with that one. We'll move on to the next question. 4242. Give evidence from the extract that platinum production in South Africa is influenced or affected by a social factor 1 and service delivery factor. Again, it's extraction. Social factor, we find it here. Apart from the labor strikes that challenged the platinum mining industry. This is a social factor. It's talking about labor strikes that are giving a challenge to platinum mining. Then a service delivery, we find it here. Access to affordable and reliable electricity is also critical. The service delivery. So this one is social, this one is the service delivery. That is the evidence that we find from the extract. Right. Refer to the map and name 2 provinces where platinum is mined. We go to our map. Our map is indicating the provinces, and this symbol is indicating platinum mining. We see here, we have the symbol, Free State. We come here, Northwest, we have the symbol. Here, Mpumalanga, we also have the symbol. Here, Limpopo is also have the symbol. Here, this is Gauteng, though it's not named. is Gauteng at the score here, somewhere in between here, is also having the same symbol. So it's Limpopo, Gauteng, Mpumalanga, Free State, and Northwest. Those are the provinces according to the map that do have mining activities for platinum. Describe the general trend of the platinum supply between 2016 and 2018 and between 2020 and 2023. Let's go to 2016 to 2018. 2016 to 2018 is this part of the graph. The trend is increasing, like what you are seeing there. From 2016 to 2018, it's increasing. Then what's the trend for this 2020 to 2023? We come here, 2020 to 2023. There. The trend is decreasing. The trend you can see there is decreasing. So that is how the trend is looking like. For this phase, it's increasing, and for this phase, it's decreasing. Right, in a paragraph of approximately 8 lines, suggest strategies that government can implement or put in place to address challenges of platinum production. The challenges of platinum production, for example, the challenges that we have noted there, a social challenge of labor strikes, and a service delivery challenge of electricity. What can the government do to try and address such problems? Right, you can talk of the government dealing with labor strikes. How can the government solve the problem of continued labor industrial action by workers in the platinum mining industry? The government can collaborate with mining companies and trade unions to try and identify a feasible solution to the problems which are being realized. The government as a stakeholder can come and settle down with the mining companies, with trade unions, trying to figure out a way so that there is no continued labor unrest. There is no labor unrest in the platinum mining industry, because it has given a negative implication on production levels of platinum, given the continued industrial action that is taken by workers in the platinum mines under the influence of their trade unions. And also with electricity provision, what can the government do? You can also look at the government coming out with alternative ways of generating electricity. We understand that ESCOM is overwhelmed, and mainly our electricity, the major electricity supply is maybe from coal reserves. If the government can maybe initiate on other new methods of generating electricity, or maybe intensifying nuclear production of electricity, then that might be a positive move towards solving the problem of electricity supply to platinum miners. Then you can also talk of policy interventions and supporting mining companies. The government should implement policies that are favorable for the operation of the mines, such that they help solve some of the problems that the companies do face. And also the government should invest in infrastructure development. Those companies, for them to operate, they are having a challenge maybe of infrastructural connectivity and infrastructural access. For example, the rail lines are needed to transport material, transport raw material, transport finished products and whatever. They need access to such infrastructure. The road network needs to be upgraded. So the government has to take the initiative to make sure that infrastructure is provided and in the right quantity, and to ensure that those businesses, they can be able to operate efficiently, given the efforts by the government. Right, there are other things that we can discuss about, or that we can think about as a solution to how the government can address those challenges. But however, we move on to the next question, which is on the SDI. Like what I had suggested earlier on, that I may well make a distinction between an SDI and an IDZ. Right, when we talk of an SDI, it's a Spatial Development Initiative. Right, Spatial Development Initiative are saying the government targets to develop areas which are undeveloped or which are underdeveloped. There are areas which are marginalized, which do not have the same level of development as other areas within the same country. So the government targets to develop such areas. Those are targeted areas under spatial development initiatives. The government seeks to develop such areas which are undeveloped by introducing infrastructure and trying to introduce industrial activities in such areas, so that at least they also catch up with the level of development of the rest of the country. That is basically spatial development initiative. Targeting those areas which are poorly developed, the government introduces infrastructure, tries to lure investors in such areas, so that those areas, they will benefit also. And also remember, those areas are featured by extreme poverty and unemployment. So in a bid to solve such problems, such social problems amongst the societies in those areas, the government seeks to try and lure investors to establish businesses and industries in such areas, so that at least the people will have access to jobs and improve their lives. Right, then we have in which province is this is the SDI, the Industrial Development Zone, the IDZ. This is an industrial estate which targets to produce products for the export market. Whatever is produced in this particular industrial estate is targeted to be exported. That is an industrial development zone. Right. Let's go to our question. Next question, question 2.5.2.5.2. In which province is the Wild Coast Spatial Development Initiative SDI located? Where do we find our Wild Coast? The correct response there is Eastern Cape. We find it in the Eastern Cape. That is where we find the Wild Coast SDI. Then according to the extract, by how much will the income of the local industries increase? Is indicated here. It's an extraction question. Local industry will increase by 360.4 million. Right. That is the contribution is indicated. We move on to the next question. State 2 physical factors that would encourage tourism in the Wild Coast Spatial Development Initiatives. What will attract tourists in such an area? Because it's also targeted for tourism and tourist activities. Right? If we check the area, we might tend to find that there are so many physical factors that can contribute towards the attraction of tourists in that particular area. That is question number 2.5.4. Right. 2 physical factors. We can talk of the scenic coastline and the beaches. They can attract. The coastline is scenic, which means it attracts tourists who want to come and view the coastline of the Wild Coast, and also there are beaches there where people can go and enjoy themselves. Then also there's diverse wildlife and also marine life. It can also be a tourist attraction where people come to view wildlife, and also people who come to view the marine life, come to view the sharks. Right. We can also look at waterfalls. The area also has got some waterfalls and also some rivers. Such rivers can also aid towards attraction of tourists. And also, if you check the climatic conditions, we have a mild climate in the area, and also we usually have a pleasant weather in most instances. So it's as an attraction to the tourists. And also, besides such, you can also talk of the lush green hills in the area and valleys. Tourists would come to view such scenic physical features of the area in the Wild Coast. So basically, if we check on this, they can be the valid reasons as to why it can be an effective tourist attraction for that particular area. Right, then I'll move on to the next question. Why would the N2 Wild Coast Toll Road project encourage economic development of the wild coast spatial development initiatives. How would the N2 Wild Coast Tour project encourage economic development? Right. The N2 Wild Coast Tour project, how does it going to encourage? Right. As the tour is being constructed, it creates jobs. Whether during its construction and after construction, still the same road needs to be maintained. So maintenance of the road, construction of the road, and also maintenance of the road is going to create jobs for the wild coast, and that is going to be a benefit to the wild coast. And also it improves accessibility. Accessibility for people and goods. Goods which are coming to the area and goods which are leaving the area, they can easily be moved because now they have a viable network connecting the wild coast to other places. Then it also contributes towards increased tourism or tourist visit. Increased tourism, given that there is now a functional and connecting road network, more tourists are now able to visit the place, and now it's convenient for tourists to visit the place, given that there is now an easier way to access the area. So increased tourism activities, that is going to contribute towards the levels of income of people in the area. Then you can also talk of the benefit of reduced transportation costs. And also travel time is a very big benefit. If there is improvement in such, then it means it's a positive benefit towards the people in the area. Right. That is question 255. Then you can move on to the last question, which is 256. Right. Question 256 is talking about why the Wild Coast Spatial Development Initiative has experienced challenges with regard to its key objectives. Right, the key objectives is to reduce poverty amongst the people in the area, and besides reducing poverty, is also targeting to create jobs for the people in the area. So why has it faced challenges to address such problems? Why is it failing to attain what it was instituted for, to create jobs for the people and to improve living standards, to wipe out poverty amongst the people of the area? But still we are seeing that the people haven't reached a level as expected by the initiative. And you can talk of different reasons here. You can argue, like for example, if you want to try and argue like what is indicated in our text here, it shows us that there is also a hindrance which is happening from what is indicated on the information that we have here. It says, however, cultural beliefs and traditional values are in conflict with economic development. This can be a very challenging effect that will make the initiative not achieve the desired results. If you are having cultural beliefs which are against development of the area, or if you are having traditional values, people who are anti-developmental, who do not want to adopt a new way of life, that is going to cause very serious challenges for the initiative, and it won't be able to reap the positive results which were intended in as short time as is possible, or as a plan. And also, if you look at the government, has the government done enough? The government also is failing to do enough to attract investors in the area. Remember, the government has to incentivize industrial decentralization and encourage investors to invest in such areas. So the government can also be blamed. It hasn't done enough to attract investors, or to attract enough investors to the area, so that there is a viability of the economy of the area and people get to acquire jobs in that particular area for the betterment of their lives. It also, we can also argue, given the argument of maladministration by the government, whereby we tend to find that maybe some funds which will be allocated towards the realization of positive results from the SDI, they are misused or they are channeled towards personal use, and that is going to affect the rate at which we are going to realize our positive results from the initiative. So that is some of the arguments that will making the Wild Coast SDI fail to achieve its objectives or its intended objectives. It's failing to achieve the core idea of reducing poverty and also the idea of reducing the level of unemployment in the area. Then I think there's another question that we also need to look at. Question 251, which says state one key objective. I think that question we had skipped it. One key objective of the SDI, like what I've been mentioning, the SDI initiative, it targets to promote economic development in specific regions. Its core idea is to target to create economic development in some areas and also to encourage investment in such areas. The government tries to encourage businesses to invest in those areas by different ways of attracting investors to create industrialization in such areas. And also it targets to create infrastructure, to invest in infrastructure, for example, roads and rail networks in such areas. Right, that's basically our first section of the paper, which is section A, with the second question on economic geography of South Africa, having 60 marks. Right, with map calculations, unfortunately for this presentation, we do not have the Middleburg map, but I'll just take you through some of the questions just to give you an insight of what you can do or how you can attack some of the questions, like in general. Then we will make another, we have another presentation specifically based on the map once the map is in place. Right. This is general map information. In which province is Middleburg located? You can find it in general information here. Like you see, the information provided is here. Middleburg is a town situated in Mpumalanga, South Africa. That is general information. You need to understand and read this information. Then refer to block A5 and what we don't have the map, but this question we can answer it. The scale of the topographical map is smaller or larger than the scale of the orthophoto map. Right, I understand you know the two scales for the two maps. Right, our topographic map, the scale is 1:50,000. For the orthophoto, the scale is 1:10,000. So it means the question is saying which one is bigger scale or which one is smaller scale. Let me explain the difference between a big scale and a small scale map. If you are comparing these two, 1:50,000 is a small scale map. It covers a wide area but gives limited details. That is a small scale map. For a topographic map, it covers a very wide area, but the details are not, it does not give much details of the features. But for this one here now, this is a large scale map, covers a small area, and it gives more details. If you check on the orthophoto map, you can actually see the details there, but on the topographic, there are less details. Right, that's the difference there. So the topographical map is a smaller scale than the orthophoto map. Then refer to the building labeled 6 on the orthophoto map. Give a reason for your answer. Definitely, it's about the details shown there that will give you the justification. If you can see more details, it means that is a large scale map, or if there's less detail, it means that is a small scale map. Right. Calculate the vertical exaggeration of a cross section on a topographical map. Use the information. Vertical scale is 1 1:2000. Then the formula is vertical exaggeration is equal to vertical scale over horizontal scale. Right, what you need to do here is when you're calculating this one here, we are saying vertical exaggeration. When we draw a cross section, we have to use a scale here on the vertical axis, which will allow us to emphasize the height of maybe some features, maybe some valleys, some hills, or some mountains. For us to be able to see, or for us to be able to emphasize the height, we should exaggerate the scale here, which means we should deliberately stretch the vertical scale such that these features, they become more pronounced and they become more visible. If we use a small scale on the vertical scale there, maybe we're using this small scale, the very same hill number, say this feature number 1, and maybe this is a valley number 2, this is a hill number 3, and maybe that one is another feature there. This feature, if we don't exaggerate, if we are to use a small scale, maybe we are using 1:50,000, maybe it will come out like this. It ends there. Then the valley comes here, just like this. We go there. This feature again, maybe it's just like that. So you see the heights here, they have no emphasis. The same feature number 1 is the same feature number 1 that we are seeing here, because we have stretched the vertical scale. We have exaggerated the vertical scale such that we emphasize the height of these features. If it's a valley, we are now able to see clearly that this is a low-lying area, this is a valley. Or if it's a gorge, you can see it by exaggeration. So that is the purpose for exaggeration. We exaggerate to emphasize the height of smaller features so that they become more visible and we emphasize on their height. So if we check this one, if we're calculating vertical exaggeration for this particular section here, what are we going to do? We are saying the vertical scale is given is 1:2000, and this extract is from a topographical map. We do not change the horizontal scale of the cross section. We can only stretch the vertical scale, which means we are saying the vertical scale is 1:2000, and the horizontal scale, we cannot change it. It's an extract from a cross section which was taken from the topographic map. We know that topographic maps, they are drawn to the scale of 1:50,000. So we are having our vertical scale 1:2000 and our horizontal scale 1:50,000, which is the same as saying 1/2000 as a representative fraction divided by 1/50,000. We introduce the multiplication sign here. What are we going to do? This one remains 1/2000 times. Now we invert this 50,000 over 1, which is now the same as 50,000 over 2,000. We cancel out the zeros, remain with 50 over 2, which is equal to 25. We express our exaggeration in number of times, which is 25 times, which means for this cross section, we had deliberately stretched our vertical scale 25 times than its original scale. We have stretched it 25 times to emphasize, or to us to be able to visualize and see how the different landforms will look like. That is a vertical exaggeration for that matter, right? Then we move on to the other question. Give one reason for vertical exaggeration, the scale when drawing a cross section, like what we've been elaborating, to give emphasis of small features like valleys or hills or plains or all those features. We want them to be visible enough. We want to emphasize their height, so that is why we exaggerate or we stretch the vertical scale. Refer to block D2. Unfortunately, we don't have the block. We just discuss on how to calculate the question. Calculate the area of the block in square meters. Use the following information. The length is 4.2 centimeters. The breadth is 3.8 centimeters. When you're calculating this, you simply multiply. But what you need to do here is when you're doing your multiplications, remember we are saying the length is 4.2 centimeters, and your answer is supposed to be presented in square meters. You need to convert this measurement to a meter measurement. If you get a length of 4.2 and you are extracting this from the orthophoto map, you multiply by the map scale of the orthophoto map, which is 10,000. Or if you don't want to do it the longer way, let me do it the longer way and the shorter way. 4.2 centimeters, you multiply by the map scale 10,000. You get to form 0, 0, 0, like that, which get 24,000. This is in centimeters. And what do you need to do for you to be able to get the actual distance in meters? You divide by the number of centimeters in a meter, which is 100. You remain with 240 meters. Or you do it the shorter way, your 2.4, you simply multiply it by 100. You get 240 meters. So this 100 here, we are extracting it from the map scale of 1 to 10,000. And if it's in centimeters, it means we are dividing it by the number of centimeters in a meter to convert the units to a meter, a measurement. So it's 10,000, we divide it by 100, we get this 100 as a direct multiplication to the measurement that we have. So you see, we still have the same. What you need to note is make sure that you are using the right map scale. If it's an extract from the orthophoto map, ensure you use the measurement, the scale of the orthophoto map 10,000. If it's an extract from the topographic map, you use the scale of 50,000. You do the same with the breadth here. You see it's 3.8 centimeters. You multiply it, if you want to do it the longer way, by 10,000, or you can simply multiply it by 100. 3.8 times 100. This is in centimeters. 3.8 times 100, you get 380. So which means now you have your measurement in meters for the breadth and the measurement in meters from the length. You can now multiply those two to get your area in square meters, which will mean that you are now just saying 380 meters, you multiply by the breadth 240 meters. Whatever result you get there is the area for that particular block indicated. So you need to make sure that you convert using the right scale, number one, and number two, you do the accurate conversions, so that when you are multiplying, you are having your breadth in meters and you have your length in meters, and you get your area in square meters for the given map section. Right. We go on to the residential area F in block B2. Right. What you need to, I will give you the clues of what you need to check for you to identify if it's a high income area or if it's a low income area. Right. If you can check that area, unfortunately we don't have the map, but we're just highlighting on the clues that you should check. Right. What you need to check there, you need to check the size of the residential stands. If you see the size of the residential stands being so small, it suggests that the area is a low income. And if you check also the density of the housing units, if they are more or less of a cluster or they are dense, it suggests that the area is a low income area. And the opposite will be true for a high income area. You check the land size, the land ownership sizes, the stand sizes. If you see that there is a big space between the housing units, or from one housing unit to the other, they are in a state of allowing for free spaces in between, it's a suggestion that the area is a high income area. Or if it is also on the orthophoto map, you can also check the nature of the buildings that we find. In low income areas, you know, the housing units, the houses are basically small in terms of their sizes. But if you check in high income areas, you can also see that the houses are bigger. So you use that justification to identify whether an area is a low income area or is a high income residential zone, giving such evidences for question number 3.2.2. If you are saying it's a high income area, you find the evidence that you use to support that it's a high income. If it's a low income, you also check on such evidence to support that it's low income residential. Then you go to question 3.2.3. Name the land use zone in which the landing strip is located. It says there's a landing strip G in block C4 and D4. Right, we just give reference of what you need to use for you to be able to figure out. Right, if you're talking of a landing strip, our landing strip is part of the functions that fall in the rural urban fringe. A landing strip falls in the rural urban fringe. Remember, there are so many activities that we tend to find in the rural urban fringe. Or before we look at that, let's try to define what the rural urban fringe is. Right, we have a zone of land use in the urban area that mainly serves the urban dwellers but is located in the countryside. The function is found in the rural area or is in the periphery of the urban area, but it serves the needs of the people in the urban area. Right, we can look at functions like the landing strips, or we can talk of the airports, or we can talk of the cemeteries, or you can talk of golf courses. Those are some of the functions that fall in the land use zone of the rural urban fringe. So it's called the rural urban fringe. That's the name of the zone. So basically, if you find a landing strip, if you check from the map, hopefully you are going to find that the landing strip is on the outskirts of the city. We do not expect to find a landing strip somewhere within the urban settlement or close to the CBD or somewhere. One, for the reason that some of those things, they do not need to take place close to residential areas for safety reasons. There are dangerous activities that might be involved in such, and hence they cannot happen close to people. And also for the reason being that land is not readily available around the focal point of the urban area. We can only find sufficient space to do such activities somewhere very far away from the periphery of the urban settlement. So such activities like sewage treatments, cemeteries, golf courses, those ones, there are some of the things that are found in the rural urban fringe. Right. Give evidence from the topographic map to show that the landing strip is ideally located. Right. The evidence that you can find there, if you find that there is open space, there is free space, the land is unoccupied, that can be a reason for the ideal location of the landing strip. Or it's located very far away from residential areas for safety reasons, that can be an ideal reason for such. Right. Let's go to question 3.2.4. Name the type of farming evident is small scale or large scale farming. Not knowing again, right? But I will give you the evidence that you need to check to see if it's small scale or it's large scale. Right? You check the land size, the land holding size. We can have cannot have large scale farming taking place mainly on smaller holdings of land or smaller units of land. So if you see that the land is extensive, is covering a wider area, it suggests that there is large scale production taking place there. And if the land holding is smaller, it suggests that there is also limited small scale production taking place. And also, if you can witness the nature of cropping that happens there, if for example you're using an orthophoto map, there is evidence of the nature of the crops which are being grown or the nature of farming taking place. With large scale, usually we have one unique product that is produced throughout. If it's a coffee farmer or it's a tea farmer, they just specialize in that production of that particular product. They don't usually mix the product. So you tend to find that there's one core product which is being produced on that particular farm. It suggests that it's a large scale production. But for small scale farmers, some of them, they are just subsistence. They tend to do intercropping. They tend to do both animal and crop production on the same piece of land. And also, you can also check evidence of, if you're using the orthophoto map, you can also check evidence of maybe the road networks and the road systems around. And also, if the area sometimes tend to find that mainly for large scale production, you tend to find that the farmers, they do have what we call the windbreaks, whereby there will be trees lined by the sides of the farm as a way of protecting the crops from the harmful effects of the winds. But with small scale farmers, they just do anyhow. They do not take those preventive measures against their crops. So you check for such evidence and try to find out how you can justify if it's small scale or if it's a large scale. Then give evidence to support whatever evidence you can use there. You can substantiate by the relevant evidence that you find from the mapped area. Then refer to block B5. Name the secondary activity evident in this area, right? For the same reason, again, you need to differentiate between secondary activities and primary activities. Secondary activities, we are looking at mainly manufacturing activities. Those are secondary activities where we are now dealing with value addition of the primary product. We have primary products from the primary sector. For example, a crop produce is part of a primary production. We do farming, we produce the crops. Then when we are now refining the crops, for example, we are now turning the maize into maize meal. That is now a secondary activity. We are now adding value to the primary product. Or we can talk of fishing as a primary activity. We get fish, but now we need to process the fish into different products. That is now part of secondary production. So you check and see which one is evident from the block given on the map. Why this activity necessary for economic development to take place in this area? Why a secondary activity is necessary? You look at things like job creation. If there is maybe a manufacturing plant in that particular area, they are nearby farmers. Now there is a manufacturing plant. It gives opportunities for employment for the people, which is good for the development of the area, and also it assists in infrastructure development. Such companies operating there, they are going to upgrade the road network. They are also going to introduce some different forms of connectivity to their markets or their source of raw materials. So that is a developmental progress for the sake of the economy of the area. Right. Move on to the next question. Is data integration is an analysis of a single or multiple data sources. When we are looking at integration, we are combining different data sets. We are bringing together different data sets. So it's analysis of multiple data sources. Right. Then the next question is referring to a block on the map. Unfortunately, I could not figure out because I don't have the map. It says there is a spotter at 51587, and that feature indicated there says H in block E4 on the topographical map represents, is it a point or a polygon symbol? Right, I'll just explain how you note, because since we don't have the map. Right, what you do, we have a presentation of geographical features on the map using the different format of spatial object presentation. Right, we have what we call the point features. Point features, those features are too small to be regarded as a polygon feature. For example, we can talk of the spot heights. They are just presented as a point on the map, on the topographic map. Or we can look at other features like the buildings. They are just presented as point objects because they are too small to be an area feature. Then we have what we call the area features or the polygon features. We have features like cultivated land, or we have features like extractions, or we have recreational grounds, or we might have all those features which are big enough to be area features. And when we're talking of area features, we are saying the boundaries of the feature are completely enclosed. They do have boundaries that are closed. And then we also have what we call the line features. Line features, sometimes I will present geographical or spatial objects using the line format. A line format, we can talk of examples like the roads on the topographic map, or we can talk of the rivers on the topographic map, the hiking trails. Those ones, they are presented as line features. So basically, you check and see if it qualifies to be a line feature, or it qualifies to be an area or a polygon feature, or it's a point feature. Right. Redraw the block above in the answer book, or redraw a line symbol that represents a natural feature. But I think we've talked about that. When the question says a line feature, which is a natural feature, make sure that you address the demands of the question. 1, it's a line symbol, and 2, it must be a natural. If you take a rod, it's a line symbol, but it's not a natural feature, which means that response is going to be wrong. So you check for a feature which is presented as a line and which is also natural, and most probably you tend to find that it might be a stream or it might be a river in that area. Those are the major features which are natural and which are presented as a line feature. Then how did integration of the spot height in the sketch and the symbol we have drawn assist in determining the location of the dam wall? That means it's a river for that matter. It's a stream or a river. How do we integrate a topography layer which is shown by a spot height in identifying the position or the location of the dam wall? Right, for us to place the dam wall, we should be able to figure out the directional flow of the river, which we can now determine by using the topographic data, which shows us the clues about the height of the different places on the map. So we are integrating topography with the river so that we are able to determine the directional flow of the river and be able now to locate the ideal site of locating the dam wall. So that is data integration. We are using 2 different data sets. We are using a drainage data layer, and we are integrating it with a topography data layer. Then the next question says, refer to the vacant land found in area 7 on the orthophoto map. What does a GIS specialist use to refer to the vacant land that separates the river from the built up area? Right, whenever you find that there is a vacant land which is between a built up area and a river, the geographical term that we use to describe that is what we call buffering. We buffer rivers to protect them from pollution activities by humans. So we split, or we put a boundary which demarcates where settlement ends and where the river should be. There should be a free space between here, whereby we can maybe introduce vegetation, or we can even fence off the river from human activities. So that land which is maintained between the extent of a settlement area and the river's coverage area, that is what we call buffering. So it's a geographical concept that we use to refer to such an act. Right. Give one reason why there is need for this vacant land. Why should we create a buffer zone between the river and a settlement? Right. For one reason, the major reason there is to avoid the pollution of the river by human activities in the settlement. If we let people settle as close to the river as is possible, maybe if we let people get to settle as close to the river, they will end up dumping waste into the river, whether domestic waste or whatever, into the river. So by trying to buffer, we are trying to limit the negative implication of human activities on to the river. That is why we keep that area empty and we keep that area unoccupied, to try and split human activities from the negative influence that they can cause to the river. And also for safety reasons, remember we've been talking about the dry point settlements and the wet point settlements. Settlements, they relate to water in one or a particular and another way round. So for dry point settlements, we are saying we cannot let people settle close to the river. What if there is a risk of flooding in the very same river? It's geographically unsound for people to stay as very close to rivers, because we know that there are incidences whereby we have high rainfall that will lead the river to overflooding its banks, and that is going to cause a negative implication on the settlements established close to the river. Right, basically those were the responses for the GIS section. I think from what we have done, we have managed to cover the whole paper in this discussion. it is my pleasure that we went through the paper, and we will meet again in other discussions to follow.